Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are doing improv today. Today is a comprehensivist Wednesday that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. Today, it's wonderful to have Mike back, continuing his series on improv. I think the series on improv is working really beautifully for 52 Living Ideas and the Comprehensivist Wednesday, because it focuses on an aspect of us that we don't usually focus on that much. We actually are doing improv all the time on 52 Living Ideas. That's what it is about, but this is explicit improv. So I think we can carry a lot of the principles here back and forth between the two. So I'm delighted to have Mike back. Mike, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Shrikant. Welcome, everybody. I guess I'm going to make a little pivot here right now because I had expected to wrap up tonight the improv series, calling it, putting it all together. So what I will do for you is I'll give you a very quick recap of the first three meetups that we have. And that I've invited a couple of guests tonight. You can see Anne up there in one of your corners and Nancy, they're fellow improvisers. Nancy's been a teacher and performer for many, many years. Anne and I have kind of followed a similar path. We're amateur improvisers, but I'm very curious to hear from Anne about how she came to love improvisation. Because if I recall, Anne, it wasn't necessarily love at first sight in terms of getting on stage and performing. And Nancy, I'm pretty sure you had a similar beginning, as did I. So we'll get into that because I'm going to interview them both separately, a little conversation with them. So let me do the wrap up very quickly for the folks that are here. We basically started this meetup as an Improv 101 because we all pretty much agreed that the skill of being able to think on your feet is really, really important, especially here at 52 Living Ideas Comprehensivist Wednesdays, because the topics are so diverse that you can find yourself in a meetup one day, especially in a subject area where you're not that comfortable. You have an idea of what's going on, but then all of a sudden somebody says something that sparks your interest and it reminds you that, hey, I do have some expertise here. So let me add my contribution. But the problem is you were not prepared to say that at the beginning of the evening. So in essence, what you're doing is you're improvising. You're having a conversation with some really smart people in an area where you might not be 100% sure of what you're doing. That's a skill. And it takes a little bit of courage first to kind of raise your hand and Zoom and get involved. And at the same time, you also have to have the ability to kind of go in and out of meetup topics. And that covered one of the meetups that we did. So I'm going to kind of go in reverse. The last meetup that we had, we called it Changing Places, Spaces, and Moods. And what that meant was changing places. So improvisers, if you're part of a show, let's say, right? In one particular scene, I could be a doctor. Now, how did that come about? Because my scene partner started the conversation by saying, Dr. Jones, I have a bone to pick with you. Now, as soon as that improviser says to me, Dr. Jones, I have a bone to pick with you, I am now Dr. Jones. Which leads us to the first meetup we had, which was the yes and principle. Improvisation is all about agreement and acceptance at the 101 level. And believe it or not, that's going to continue all the way up. So what happens is if you practice enough improv, so we really worked on that yes and principle in the first meetup. Somebody says something to you on stage, there is now a reality. And it turned out, as a bit of a recap, that this yes and principle is more of a mindset than an improv tool. Because if you get in the habit of first accepting what somebody says and then taking the opportunity to enhance that, well, that can be lifted up off an improv stage and be put into any conversation. So changing places. I'm a doctor in one scene. I'm now off stage because my scene is over. I wait 5 minutes. Next thing I know, I'm in the scene again. And this time I'm a carpenter. How do I know? Because maybe I started the scene and said something to the audience. Well, how do you do that? How do you actually stand in front of a group of people and start talking with enough confidence that tells the audience, hey, that's Dr. Jones? Well, you simply have to change places. It's just practice. And then if I become a carpenter, everything that I know about carpentry, which isn't much, needs to come out in a confident voice. How do you do that? Again, it's just practice. The last meetup, we also talked about changing moods. So improvisation is about not just changing your mood, but justifying to the audience why you changed the mood. For example, we talked last time about winning the lottery, and the person who won the lottery, let's say it's me, we were picking up telephones and you were pretending that you got great news, but you reacted to it in a negative way. So again, I pick up the phone. Hello? What? I won $1 million? Oh, you got to be kidding me. Oh, this really sucks. Now, so what I'm doing there is I'm playing a little game with the audience, because as soon as they see me pick up the phone, and by the way, this is a real phone in my hand now. I can't just take this phone and go, because I just threw my $1,100 iPhone on the floor. But I pick up the phone and what? I won the lottery? So there's some information, but now my mood's going to change. Oh, damn it. Now, that face that you're looking at, I cannot change in the middle of a scene unless I justify it. So somebody picks up the phone and they're told that you won $1 million. And all of a sudden they're furious. Why? And that's where the improvisation comes in. In the little intro video I did for this meetup, maybe I can't stand my accountant. The guy smells like cigarettes. I'm going to have to go in there and work out paying my taxes. This is horrible. I justified why I'm in a bad mood. Now, changing mood sometimes, or changing status, occurs in a scene. The more improvisation you do, the better you get at that. And that is actually a game that they play with each other. It's called status change. I'm talking to you from a high status position. Maybe I'm your professor. I'm your math professor. And it turns out that I don't know shit about math. I'm actually a full-fledged idiot, but the audience doesn't know that yet. My scene partner comes on stage with me. Professor Amori, I want to talk to you about my grade. If I handle this correctly, I can kind of sneak in something about the fact that I don't know anything about math. Now, how would that happen? Because the student is complaining about their grade. They come up to me and they start talking, maybe it's arithmetic, and little by little by little, I let the audience know that I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. Absolutely no idea. So I'll go from the top again, and then I want to talk to my dear friends, Ann and Nancy. When we're done talking, we're going to turn the recording off, and then we're going to try to engage everybody here tonight in some improv exercises. And we'll get there in a moment. So from the beginning, first step, yes, and. As a beginning improviser, if you're in a scene with someone and they say anything to you, no matter how outlandish, the first step, yes, and. Now, you don't literally have to say those words, although in your first improv class, the teachers will make you say those words. But I'm looking right now, I can see all these boxes. I'm looking at Joe Bullock. And if I say to Joe Bullock, Joe, that tie makes you look so handsome. Joe has a tie on. He can't say, I don't have a tie. What do you mean? My button's open. Whoa, what just happened there? The audience is going to feel like, whoa, what just happened? I say to Joe, Joe, that is an amazing tie. Now it's up to Joe to say something about the tie that makes the scene go forward. That was week one. Yes, and. Meetup number 2 is something we called the game. The game is not necessarily an improv game that you play. The game is this kind of secret little back and forth that improvisers do. One example is the straight and the crazy. The crazy is the one who says, for example, I had a friend, Emma, who was an actress, improvise a scene with Lauren. So Emma is an actress. Lauren is an attorney in New York City. Very little improv experience. I remember leading a group once, and I said to them, I want you to do, the only suggestion you get is something called twisted emotion. And they said, what do you mean? That's it, twisted emotion. They began the scene by Lauren saying to Emma, hey, sis, wow, you look miserable. Now, you see what just happened there? Hey, sis, you look miserable. There's information there. These two women on stage are now sisters. They cannot change that. Now, there needs to be some justification for why Emma looks miserable. So she says back, yeah, my flight from California really sucked. And I wrote some notes here, and I remember Lauren saying, yeah, you know, you have no luck when you fly. Tell me about it. Now, if I'm an improviser and somebody says to me, you have no luck when you fly, and I say, tell me about it, that is affirmation. Tell me about it. Now, what is the audience waiting for? What was wrong with this flight? What could have possibly happened? And she says, oh man, the coffee was cold, a wing fell off, the guy next to me was sneezing his head off. Now I'm watching this, I'm directing this scene, and I'm not saying anything. And Lauren beautifully goes, what? The coffee was cold, a wing fell off, and a guy was sneezing next to you? Well, I don't know about you, but if I'm on a plane and a wing falls off, that's a little scary. But Emma was playing the crazy. That was the game they created with each other. The crazy was she was so upset. Why? The coffee was cold. The wing fell off. Okay, the wing fell off. And the guy next to me was sneezing. And then Lauren said, the wing fell off. What are you doing? What happened? She goes, yeah, I was checking my Instagram account. Next thing I know, we're flying like this. I was so upset. My boyfriend texted me again. And Lauren says, you're still seeing him? Yeah. Like I'm on my Instagram and I can't read sideways. The coffee spilled on me. The guy. And meanwhile, finally, Lauren gets to, well, what about the wing? And she said, there was a carpenter. He had some tools. It worked out fine. You see what happened there? What's the crazy? Emma, who's on a plane that had a wing fell off, she could give one crap about that. All she cared about was the coffee, the guy sneezing, her boyfriend breaking up. And Lauren yes-and that perfectly by saying every time Emma seemed like so complacent about the wing, the more Lauren was like, what's wrong with you? That's the straight answer, followed by the crazy. That's the game they played. The third segment was learning how to change places, your moods, and your actual space, which I'll conclude with this. Physicality. When you're doing improv on Zoom, it's very, very difficult. So for here tonight, later, we are going to do some exercises together. When you're in person, it's so much easier to read body language. I know Nancy does somehow in these tiny little boxes, she manages to become physical. But we also learned, if we're going to study improv together, that you have to make your physicality or the space that you're operating in consistent. So as I mentioned in that intro video, if I'm customer service and you come up to me and you're shaking your finger like this, already the audience knows what's coming, right? Yeah, I'm not saying a word. I'm sitting here, good afternoon, and you're going like this. Well, if there's a counter in between us, I can't just walk through that counter like I'm parting the seas and have a conversation with you. If I pick up a phone, I have to put the phone down. That was the physical part of that. So that's where we went. Now, what I was prepared to do tonight, I guess I'm going to have to improvise a little, is wrap this up. But since it looks like we may go forward a little bit, I'm going to pivot and I'll give you an idea of where we can go from here. You can go to places that I guarantee you wouldn't think you would be able to do. So I don't know everybody that's here. I do know that most of the folks that have joined us were not improvisers. They were folks who were interested in it and had fun when we did some exercises. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to chat with Ann and Nancy separately, quickly, to give you an idea of what it was like for us to begin this process. And then Nancy will give you some perspective from the teaching standpoint. And then who knows, we'll see where these next meetups take us. Maybe we could even do a show one of these days, somewhere in between Philly and New York. We'll see. So Shrikant, if you can spotlight me and Ann, that would be great. Ann, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for giving us some time. What I wanted to do, because we did have some folks who were beginners here, I wanted you to share a little bit about how you popped into improv and what your emotions were at the very beginning, if you don't mind.
Well, Mike, I am basically a pretty shy person. If I walk into a party, I'm looking for the one person I know. I don't do well in group settings. And so my first step, because some years ago I was in a corporate job as an art director, and I was terrified of doing presentations. I thought, this can't go on like this. And the company I was working for started a Toastmasters club. For anyone there who doesn't know what Toastmasters is, it's a wonderful international organization for people to learn public speaking. And so I started getting more and more comfortable just standing up and speaking in front of people. The next thing I knew, Mike and I have an acquaintance in common, a woman named Melanie. She came to visit our club. And Melanie started showing us about improv. And I thought, this is amazing. This scares the crap out of me, but that's why I want to do this. I really want to do this thing that is totally outside my comfort zone. And so I started taking lessons from various people, and including Nancy. And I'm now at the point where, as I often said with Toastmasters, that I can't remember why I was afraid.
Wow.
Because
wow.
I'm not somebody who could do stand-up comedy, because I cannot craft a whole comedy routine, and I can't memorize things to save my life. I also don't want to be standing there alone. The beauty of improv is, one of the phrases you'll hear is, I've got your back.
Mm.
You are generous with your scene partners. You give them things. You don't expect to be the star of anything, because this is a team effort. And so you just learn, and it gets easier and easier, and it gets a lot more fun. And I have to tell you that one of the beauties of doing improv is that it makes you a better conversationalist.
Mm.
Because if you've ever been in one of those conversations where you've just talked for a little while, and the person you're talking to responds to something you said 3 minutes ago, not to the thing you just said, that doesn't work in improv. In improv, you're right there. You're on the moment. You respond to the thing that just happened right now, not the thing that happened 2 minutes ago, because you'll derail a scene that way. So that, as I say, it really helps in a lot of parts of life. I'm sure Mike has talked about being called on in meetings and having to just jump up and say something, anything. And
right.
if it's funny, it's gravy.
It's true. You know, I met Melanie at a singles mixer, and this is a true story. She's a great improviser, and she was behind me, and she said, "Thanks for cutting me off." I went up to the bar to get a drink, and this happened. She goes, "Thanks for cutting me off," and I turned around. She goes, "Yeah, I was first," but she had a smile on her face, so I thought she was just joking around. And I said, "Okay, can I buy you a drink?" And she goes, "Yeah, get me so and whatever it was, I don't remember." She goes, "But no lime." And I said, "Oh, so you're the one that's like with the citrus protest signs outside." It said something what I thought was like pithy and funny. And she just bang came right back at me. And I was taken aback, and I like to yuck people up, I'm always like to chat. And I went back at her, and then she just said something that blew me away. And I said, "Well, like, what do you do, improv or something?" And she goes, "By the way," and that's how we met. But I want to come back to something you said earlier, because Shrikant's done several meetups here on the art of conversation. And what I have found that improv has helped a lot with is just to be able to articulate, because what happens is if you practice enough improv, you have to say something. So at the beginning, you might feel a little tongue-tied. All of that is fine, but the right teacher gets it out of you. But after a while, the words just come out. Like they tell you, don't think too much, just get the words out. So in conversation, sometimes I found it helped that there's very rarely a dull moment. It's almost like you have this trigger that kind of allows you to talk, at first. And if you don't mind me asking, what was Toastmasters like at the beginning in terms of nerves and feeling comfortable in front of
I
people?
was petrified.
Wow.
Yeah, my voice shook. I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. I mean, just doing my little 3-minute icebreaker had me breaking out in a sweat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm the opposite in terms of being prepared. If you asked me to give a speech, like a serious speech, and it was all written out, and I have to have my head up and look down now and then, I couldn't do it. I would be terrified. But if you told me to MC some event and you told me a little bit about the people that I'm talking about, I'm not saying I would do, you're going to see me at the Oscars next year, but I'm much more comfortable in the breeze, having an idea of what I'm supposed to say, as opposed to coming off formally. Like even doing dramatic acting, if I was reading from a script, that would make me uncomfortable. It's something I want to do for the same reason. And Anne, also another meetup that we did here, so your points are well taken, is we did a whole meetup on the comfort zone here. On Wednesday nights, and how important it was to get out of it. And I think improv at the beginning, of course you're going to feel uncomfortable if you haven't done it before. But the good teachers, somebody like Nancy, they can tell right away. But what was the transition like from when you went from standing at Toastmasters and being incredibly uncomfortable to now doing improv, where you're finding that magic?
Well, it really was a transition. Excuse me. One of the things I teach people when I coach them in Toastmasters is don't memorize your speech. Don't have it all written out, because those are the kind of things that make you wooden.
Yeah.
It's really hard to make eye contact with the audience and just feel animated if you're reading off a piece of paper.
Right.
So what I usually do if I'm giving a speech even is I will come up with a list of just a few bullet points. And everything becomes a little bit improvisational after that. I don't do a huge amount of practicing. I just figure out what it is I want to say. And I might even have one word that I'll riff on.
Right.
As long as the speech begins and ends properly, it doesn't matter if it's exactly what I started out to say. Because one of the beauties of any kind of performance is the audience doesn't always know if you're screwing up.
Right.
All they know is they're being entertained.
Correct. Yeah. And the other beauty is there is magic sometimes in scenes, not all of them, obviously. Sometimes you're on stage. And what's interesting is I've learned to love when I'm in a scene, and both, especially with someone that that's always the best part, because I like to give whomever I'm doing a scene with a smile before it begins, even before you get a suggestion, because I find that the connection, the smile just just instantly loosens me up. And then as it's going on, there are times when both of us know this isn't going anywhere. Like we have hit a brick wall, and what we're putting out there is so bad that it's actually funny.
Yep.
And I think that's also part of the craft, is when a really seasoned improviser is in front of the audience and somehow they let the audience know, hey, is this mic on, without saying that. And that's what makes it fun. And it also diffuses a lot of the anxiety when you begin a scene and you've got that little twinkle in your eye with the person that you like to improvise with. Which is something I'll conclude with you, because you've done enough classes now. That what is the kind of person that hits you right? Like when you find out you're going to be doing a scene with someone in a class, for example, is there any particular characteristic that you like about that particular improviser?
Well, there are certain people. There's people like you who do accents beautifully. There are people who have all kinds of skills. But beyond the skill level, it needs to be somebody who is generous.
Yeah.
Someone who isn't going to try to hog the limelight, someone who will do the quick ping pong like dialogue.
Right.
That is often so funny.
That's true. That's true. But there's a counterpoint to that sometimes, that improv is very funny because it's almost like Tao-like, you have a little yin yang thing going on, because when you're on stage, somebody has to say something.
Yes.
And some improvisers are more comfortable than others initiating scenes. But at the same time, you don't want to steamroll your partner. So and again, this is not a 101 concept. This comes as you take some classes, that you begin a scene with someone and you have to make sure you temper yourself, that you're not kind of dictating everything. Yes. But at the same time, you both can't stand there waiting for the other person to initiate. So it just takes practice. But
exactly. And as we always say, improv is not stand-up. Improv is not going for the funny right away. Exactly. And it's not about having an act and being the center of attention. It's being part of a team.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's interesting. I had seen somebody talk about the art of thinking inside the box, that sometimes improvisers try to go out too much in order to be funny or pithy or cute, when the real funny stuff is actually inside the box, like just simple, stay on topic. And the fact that you're improvising is what makes it funny, these simple concepts. But
that reminds me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
That just reminds me of something I had read once about movies. If you have a premise of a movie that's outrageous, aliens are invading, terrible, horrible things are happening, you still have to get the minutia exactly right. As soon as somebody picks up a phone that they wouldn't have had that year,
right.
It.
Yeah.
And improvising is very much like that. You keep all the small stuff on point, and then you can blow the heck out of the rest of it.
That's a great point. It's funny. I remember the last show that I saw with Blind Tiger. One of the improvisers picked up a phone and said, I should have invented this, because he realized that there was no way that this phone should have been in the scene during the time period. But that's the beauty. And he just caught it.
Made it work.
And he made it work. And the fact that you tell the audience, I should have invented this iPhone. And that's what made it funny. But and just before I let you go, is there like words of assurance you can give people in this group, that like how much fun it is, and how I don't want to use the word easy, but that any hurdle that they think they might be facing really isn't that big?
Well, one of the things that I always keep in mind is that your scene partners and the audience want you to have fun.
Yeah.
Because if you're having fun, they're having fun.
There you go.
Nobody is going to heckle you for the most part in improv the way they do with stand-up. Nobody wants to see you fail. And so you just feel the encouragement all around yourself. And you do have the support of the other people in the scene. So you're never alone in improv.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
that was great. Perfect. Shrikant, can you spotlight my dear friend Nancy with me? Thanks, Ann. Hello, Miss
Hey,
Follis.
Mike.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm real good.
I have no idea what to talk about.
Well,
Yeah.
a subject I know is near and dear to both of our hearts, for sure.
Correct. Yeah, canasta.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. So Nancy, I wanted to chat a little bit from the teaching perspective with you. And you can, as you heard talking with Ann, how do you, you've been teaching a long, long time. How do you deal with the beginner or the beginner's mind with improv? You know, especially if you see somebody's a little hesitant at first. Are there any tricks or things that you've learned over the years?
Well, you know, I think anyone who attempts to do something new and different it's an act of courage to put yourself in front of other people.
Mhm.
And even if you're someone like myself who came from a fairly extensive background in training, I had a business in Manhattan for many years, and I used to do training at a high level for people, but I always knew exactly what I was going to be presenting. I had objectives, I had a plan, I knew my audience. And improv, which is completely off the cuff, unscripted and spontaneous, was a very different skill set. But it's not only, improv is something that transcends a bunch of games, you know, on Zoom or face to face. It's really a life skill. And back to one of the basic principles you talked about, yes, and a lot of us have gotten no buts in life. You know, we're in a business meeting and you have an idea. And if you're one of those brave souls who dares to say something and speak up in a meeting, very often someone may shoot down your idea. You know, what do you, oh, I was thinking we could do blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but, you know, you hear the big but, rather than someone acknowledging and validating the idea that you have and maybe even building on it. So I think supporting other people, being open to other people's ideas, listening and supporting other people and building on what they say is a life skill that is in short supply today. We need that a lot more than ever. And for someone who is beginning, I think it's a matter of turning the brain off a bit and trusting that whatever you say is going to be okay. And one of the things that I've said from running, you know, my MeetUp for many years and also doing improv with Melanie, who was part of World Class Indifference, and we performed together for many years, going back to, you know, the early 2000s, like going back like 20 years now. But one of the things that, you know, I've always said is there really are no mistakes in improv. There's only better choices. And better choices are made in life in general because we make mistakes, we learn from them, hopefully. It's like if anyone has seen the movie Groundhog's Day, you know, Bill Murray steps in the hole and he gets his foot wet. And then you see him, he steps in the hole again. And I think it's the fourth or fifth time where he's like, oh, there's a hole there. And then he steps right over it, moves on. So in improv, it's a matter of, just to Ann's point too, it's a matter of being present and trusting that whatever you say is going to be okay, but to be free to open your mouth, express yourself. And as you were pointing out earlier, Mike, it's really acceptance of what accepting and embracing whatever is given to you, the offer, what we call the offer in the scene. So if the offer is that you're a carpenter, you're a carpenter. If the offer is that you're having lunch on Mars, planet Mars, then that's the new reality, the scene. And by people offering information within a scene, you're building something, you're creating something by assigning an attribute or information to another person and them responding yes and adding to that. So it's creating a new reality, and that's very playful, it's creative, It's keeps the brain sharp because you
Yeah.
have to think on your feet, and you can't be worrying about yesterday or mulling the past or worrying about the future if you're engaged in improv in the moment. So, we have these beginner free workshops that we offer where people get to really play with some of the basic concepts
Yeah, great.
online.
Nance, let me ask you a question. So you said with all the business training and the presentations you did from more the scripted side, did you have sort of the opposite transition of going from speaking from a scripted standpoint and then being off the cuff and improv? Was there a hiccup there for you?
Yeah, there were lots of hiccups. I mean, there was a big hiccup going way back to college when I became so terrified in a public speaking class to give a 5-minute speech that I stood in front of the group and nothing came out. I must have been in the fight, flight, freeze mode. I was completely frozen. So this was not something, any kind of speaking in front of a group was not a natural thing for me. But I did get to the point over time where I developed my skills. I also come from a background where I did some work early on with Toastmasters. And I think for my first speech, I had 17 ums and ahs. I didn't even know that was possible, but it was just nerves of being in front of a group. But I got to the point where I developed that skill. I spoke at an international convention. I spoke for the American Management Association more than any other speaker. And I had a whole career where that was an integral part of what I did.
Right.
When I switched out of that and I moved into, when I went to some kind of free workshop for improv, I was really hoping that nobody would say it's your turn to go up on stage. My hands were clammy, my throat was dry, and I was sitting there really afraid to go up there on stage because I had no idea. I felt very vulnerable, and unlike some people that love being in the center of attention, that was not my natural go-to. But I dropped out. I took a few workshops, I dropped out, and then it was probably several years later where I started to pick that up again. And it evolved into many other things, including 7 years with a performance team and time prior to that with another group in Rye, New York, where we did some performing and various workshops. But
Oh, that's great.
My goal is really to build connection with other people and
what I wanted to
enjoy and spark joy. Because
exactly. We've talked about that recently, about kind of just spreading the word and doing, with even at a festival or some event to get people involved. I want to also talk quickly about children. I'm probably going to be teaching in January, offering a class in improvisation for 4th and 5th graders. And you can all see the chessboard behind my head. So those who know me know that I teach chess for a living. And I find myself constantly improvising in front of the chessboard in conversation. I like the pieces to talk to each other. I know it sounds silly, but it's a great way to learn anything. I mean, it could be chess or anything else, but if you bring those pieces to life, you understand. Like if you're a chess player and you have a piece that can't move, a very important piece, and it's stuck, it just literally can't move. Well, if you kind of bring that piece to life, what would it be saying? It's like a very powerful piece that is literally blocked. Well, because I love improvisation, I'll be standing in front of I did it today. I was teaching a class today with these are 1st and 2nd graders, and I'm talking to the chess pieces. Right. So anyway, where I'm going with this is, what do you think? Because I think you've taught some kids the value of teaching kids improvisation. Because my feeling is with the standardized testing that as these kids get older, they start to stress the test more than they do the learning process. And I find that kind of stifles their natural ability to improvise, because kids are incredible. If you give a kid, put them in a sandbox when they're young, give them a couple of rocks and a turtle, and off they go. But, you know, the minute you start kind of looping them in the test mode, and I'm not saying, I'm not denigrating that, I'm just kind of making a general statement, but I think it's important. What was your experience teaching kids improv?
Well, at one point we put 840 kids through improv training at one school, at a magnet school, and
Wow.
from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. But I think a lot of kids are kind of stifled. They're not really encouraged to express themselves and to hear their own voice. I think it's always filtered through what other people are going to think.
Right.
And is
right.
it okay? Am I going to get likes if I say this? Are other people going to be judging me? Am I going to be teased for saying something? And improv, you know, to be free, to know, to say what you want to say and be able to be silly, be playful, look stupid, whatever is very free. Now, trying to get a group of middle school kids to actually do that is a completely different thing. I think there are people who are really good at interacting with kids and more inclined to be able to pull that out. But there's so many filters out there in society that kind of make kids reticent to do anything where they're not going to get the approval of their peers. And I think improv is really freeing. It's empowering and it builds confidence when kids just get to kind of be whoever, say whatever, as long as they're not, you know, putting down or offending other people. They're just free to be whoever they want to be. So I'd love to see more of that. I think there's a real role for that opportunity to
that's
help
great.
kids in that way.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you so much. That was terrific.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate your insight and everything else with all of that.
Happy to be here.
Shrikant, if it's okay, if we can turn the recording off.
Okay.
We can do some exercises and then put the recording back on later on in the evening when we do the Q&A and takeaway.
Wonderful. Joe, could you do that? Could you pause the recording?